What's up, guys? This is Mike.
And Joe.
From Deep Wood, Force of Will.
Deepest wood ever.
So, going off of that, we're here today to discuss a topic that's probably going to be really relevant to a lot of newer players that are coming into the game, and obviously relevant for people who have been playing the game for a while, and it's the top 5 meta decks at the current moment of the game.
Yeah, basically what we saw at the ARG, Philly, yeah. And what we're seeing with our locals, how the game is progressing towards, what deck do people want to bring in order to win?
Exactly. And if you want to win at these bigger events, these are probably the decks that you're going to have most success with.
Or the decks you'll encounter there as your matchups.
So knowing the ins and outs of these decks will be really important for you becoming a better player and learning more about, how to beat these matchups.
Also how to side against them.
Right. Because the side is always important.
So we'll get started.
Quick note, these are all before Lapis Cluster. The meta will definitely shift once Lapis Cluster comes out. Once we see a lot of changes in the way that the game is played.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see, Zero. That was the most recent one that got revealed. That's going to see play.
And the new Energize mechanic is going to be really, really good, from what I predict. Just because it's a way to come back when you're on the draw.
Right.
Because at this point in the game, being on the play is much stronger than being on the draw. But we'll go over that in a later video.
Yep.
So these are all decks that have been topping at, obviously, the Force of Will Championships, the AGPs and the Grand Prix, and the State Championships for ARG, which we recently went to. Again, if you saw those videos, we didn't do too great, but then again...
It was my first major, so I put that as an excuse.
And I just brought a really terrible deck. So...
Yeah, well, you just have excuses.
So I wish I could have watched this video before going to that event, because as you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner there, you can win really nice stuff winning these games. So
well, those are from AGPs.
Yeah. So think about that.
Yep.
Bring these decks or bring a counter to these decks, and you might have your shot at one of these.
Yep.
So going into our first deck, we're going over Shion variants.
Yeah.
I'll give this one to Joe because Shion is his major bay.
Shion is a ruler very close to my heart. I really love her mechanic. Her mechanics revolve looking at the top card of your deck, and she also has a pretty strong judgment, which allows you to cheat in large resonators. The major one being Celestial Wing Seraph, which you can see there. Celestial Wing Seraph into Lucifer is a really big combo. It's like, if you judgmented on turn 4, it's 3 mana, a 9/10, a 10/10, a 9/9, and your opponent has to banish a resonator. That type of tempo swing can really change the course of a match. Unfortunately, because she's a AJ ruler and doesn't get the ability to flip back like Reflect before the opponent can respond, she's very prone to Black Moonbeam, and it kind of took her off the radar a little bit. We still see very few tops with her, but she's definitely not as seen as much as Reflect.
Yeah, again, the biggest decks you'll see, she's a water ruler, but most of the decks are very highly based in darkness type attribute stuff, like Soul Hunt, Scorn of Dark Alice. She herself can use Black Moonbeam, but we've also seen some Wind and Light variants that have been pretty successful in the past, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, mostly the big thing about Shion is that she herself presents a lot of damage, and she has a similar consistency aspect to Reflect Reframe due to her Hydromonica. The thing is, though, if you get put under Barrier of Shadows, or if the opponent's playing Gil, her ability to cycle through the deck and filter her draws is limited, as opposed to Reflect, which is always free.
Exactly. So we'll quickly go over her pros and cons. We said a lot of these in the previous,
slide.
In the previous slide, but it's really good to visualize them like this. So obviously her pros is that she has early access to these really big cards: Celestial Wing Seraph, Lucifer, Arthur Pendragon. You have a lot of really big stuff.
She also has a God's Art that's very aggressive. It's give herself +5/+5, and then deal that attack damage that she has to a Resonator, so that can clear the way for a massive kill, for especially against a deck like Stealth, for example, which likes to put itself on low life. She can get up high enough to push through that wall.
And quick note is that her God's Art, like all God's Arts, is a quick effect. So if you attack something and something blocks it, you can deal the damage and the attack will just straight up go through.
Right.
She has a great Regalia. Hydromonica is phenomenal, and it gives you a similar filter to Reflect, though not as potent, I would say. So naturally, she plays really well with Rules of Moria. You want to see your Regalia early, and because of that, you want to see your Rules of Moria.
And this is something that some players have just said in general. The deck has a lot of amazing art in it. You get to play a lot of really cute-looking cards.
Shiona's Bay. And going on to the cons, obviously we said before that the deck has a high reliance on becoming a J ruler.
Also, because once Shion dies, a lot of her support dies. Hymnals no longer triggers. Hydromonica costs twice as much. What else is there? Is there anything?
I think that's it.
Okay, yeah, that's the major thing.
And you can no longer look at the top card of your deck, which is obviously the selling point.
Mm-hmm.
So your deck is very weak to Moonbeam. Your deck's also very weak to Barrier of Shadows because a higher judgment cost is not what the deck needs, and having to pay even more for Hydromonica is not fun.
Exactly. Also, like we said before, the filter ability is less reliable than Reflex. This is actually saying that if you get one of the big cards in your opening hand, like a Celestial Wing Seraph, you can't get it out of your hand unless you play other sources like Foment of the World Tree or maybe like Laying the Foundation. It's kind of what sucks about it because you have to preemptively take the card off the top of your deck and put it on the bottom, or else it's going to become stuck in your hand for a very long time.
Cheshire Cat used to make this happen really easily. You used to be able to stack stuff with her, but unfortunately, with the format shift, Cheshire Cat was gone, so
Rip.
Rip in peace that play. And then the last small note, which doesn't seem great, which doesn't seem like something that's a problem, is that the power plays occur on turn 4 for the Dark variants. This doesn't sound like it would be an issue, but the thing is that if you're on the draw and your opponent's playing Stealth, their turn 4 is setting 2 and passing. Your turn 4 is setting up your big field, and then after your big field is set up, they stealth you in, deal damage, deal the -16, and the other -16 to both of your angels, and then you're left with almost no board presence.
Yeah, you basically judgment and lose the angels for free, which is awful.
And unfortunately, that is one of Shion's weaknesses. But she is strong. She has a lot of pros that make her really, really potent in this current format. A lot of nice power plays, pushes. So we give her the nice little number 5 spot there.
Yeah, not many other decks can take that number 5 spot.
All right, moving on to number 4. We've got Swag Long.
Swag Long, Huang Swag, whatever you want to call them.
Long Wang.
Long Wang.
Air horns. This is Huang Long, leader of the Sacred Beasts, the biggest thing that people really play in this current format.
Yeah, it's a 6-mana card, and the card does a lot. It brings out all Sacred Beasts based on each of the mana you pay for it, but if you're playing a deck based on around Huang Long, you're going to be paying each of its mana, so you'll get all 4 of them.
So with Huang Long decks, we can talk about the Huang Long in the same way we can talk about a lot of control decks because of the fact that there's a lot of ramping strategy involved. There's green control. There's cancels in the deck. Again, Reflect. This is the first Reflect deck that's going to come up on this list, but it's a deck that can only exist with Reflect due to the fact that you can...
That is not true. It just topped with Valentina 2.0.
Man, we gotta mess up my... It should only work with Reflect, unless you're brave, or stupid, or very brave.
Well, the idea behind this deck is that you ramp up hard, you cancel the big plays, especially if you're playing against aggro. You just cancel. They never get any tempo. They never start pressuring your life, and then you just play Huang Long into their board, and it wrecks them because you get a lot of effects. You get deal 800 damage, bounce a card that's 4 or less, gain 800 life, and
draw a card.
And all those effects get bodies with them. You get a 14/14, a 5/7, an 8/8, a 6/6, and a 4/4.
Did we calculate out how big that gets?
It's around like 38/40.
So 38/40 for 6 mana in one card.
Yep, and so basically if they don't even stop at the next turn and they just swing at your face, you'll kill them because you're dealing almost 40 damage, and with the Reflect buff you deal 4k. And
with the buff from Qing Long,
Yep, the Qing Long also gives a buff to all Sacred Beasts of +2/+2 for 1 mana, which is amazing.
Yep. And the last little fact about this deck is that you can take on multiple guises. You can take on the guise of control deck, obviously with your cancels, but also because of cards like Horn of the Sacred Beasts, you can play your Sacred Beast out 1 or 2 turns early, and then just gain a lot of tempo from that.
Yep, because some of those Sacred Beasts are pretty good for their cost. Like Qinglong's a 3 mana 8/8, so if you play that a turn early, 2 mana 8/8s are ridiculous.
Yep. So there's a lot of good that the deck does. So again, we'll go over these pros and cons. Big pro is that the huge tempo shift comes out of Huanglong's ability. You get a lot of volume, a lot of power on board, and a lot of people just can't deal with that once it hits the board.
Yep, we also talked about how Horn of Sacred Beast can let you play out your turns as opposed to just laying it out all at once with Huanglong.
You have a lot of cancels in the deck. Obviously, cancels are insane in this format just because being able to gain the upper hand on tempo, it means the world to a lot of control decks.
Well, the reason why cancels are so good is that once the cards are played out on the board, they usually have their effect and their value given out. Like all the stealth cards are battle cries, kinda, whatever they would be called, enters.
Yeah, when this card enters the field.
Yeah, so once those things enter, they don't care if they die. They're just bodies at that point. But anyway, on to the cons. So, unfortunately, you're playing a lot of bad cards. Bad, I put in quotes. They don't really do much. They're just kind of like almost vanillas on their own. And if you just start drawing multiples of them, you can't get them out of your hand. And then when you go to play Huanglong, you got to worry about if you have enough targets left in deck because you drew into too many of them, and it can be annoying. But Reflex Filter can help with that, and I don't know how the Valentina player got away with that. I'll have to check out his matches.
Yep. Another little con is that if you play the game out this way, your first few turns are normally spent trying to ramp up and build up your stone base, but not build a lot of board pressure.
The board presence may not matter too much, though. It depends on the matchup, of course, but against a deck like, namely, Aggro, I'm not going to name a deck, actually. We'll let the list do that.
Right.
Against Aggro, that having to play a Blessing of Yggdrasil, which is the main ramping card in this deck, or Elf can put you behind when they play a big tempo card like Lancelot if you don't leave mana open.
Exactly. And then the last little factoid is that Prison in the Lunar Lake has seen a lot of play lately in decks like Stealth, and obviously other cancels will be played in a lot of other control decks. If your Huanglong gets canceled when you're at 6 mana, you forego 6 mana and a turn worth of tempo.
Yeah, you're probably lose from that. Also, the deck's kind of weak to Flame Trap, the 2 major techable traps, quote-unquote, in this game.
Yeah, the stealth stuff.
Yeah. But many of the major decks are playing those cards right now.
Right, so you have to be a little concerned about those when you're going in. If your opponent has set stuff, be careful about going in on it. Basically, with Huanglong, you have to play very conservatively and very cautiously.
And you gotta be able to read what your opponent's doing and make the proper play around what they're doing.
So if you're facing that off, the deck takes a little bit to get used to. It's not a very deck conducive to normal tempo play. Like a lot of people that are just picking up the game right away won't really understand what the deck's meant to do.
Yeah, you're gonna wind up saying, "Oh, let me just play Huanglong on 6. It's an amazing card," and then you'll wind up running into a cancel or something, and you'll lose out on a big portion of your deck's damage potential.
Yeah. So obviously the deck has its weaknesses, but all in all, the volume that Huanglong creates is just insane, and the deck is deserving of a number 4 spot.
Yep.
So moving on to the next one. Speaking of board volume, we've got Machina.
Machina is a crazy deck.
So the one that we're talking about mainly is the Green Machine Machina, which is focused on building up your board with Moonbreeze Elf and Wind Sprite to just float Void Will so that you can use Machina's ability on both players' turns.
The idea is that you slowly build up your board, one mana minion at a time. Don't swing too much. Just only go for low pokes if you think that it's necessary, but don't put yourself in the way of having your minions cleared. And then you build up to 4 mana. Use the 4 mana to judgment Machina into his J Ruler side. Enter a bunch of machines, play March of the Machine Lord, and kill them.
Exactly. So obviously the deck is very consistent, as we mentioned before, because Machina lets you search anything out for X will, where X is the cost of the Resonator you're bringing out. So you play a lot of 1-drops. And the fact that you have those mana dorks, being Moonbreeze and Wind Sprite, means that at any point in the game, if you have a will floating, you just have a search.
Yep, and creating cards out of mana is really powerful.
Yep.
Surprise, surprise.
And of course, with the newest machines that came out of the latest set,
which is Robox and
TikTok Automaton. Basically, it's really hard to clear off machines now, and they can actually become beaters in the late game with Machina's ability to banish a Resonator with no attribute, because that'll still trigger their effects. The March of the Machine Lord's an aura effect, so whatever you get off the top of the deck will then have +3/+3 in swiftness.
It's pretty good.
And then, of course, discounted push spells mean that you have even more power to your OTKs. Main push spells being March of the Machine Lord, and every so often we'll see Maribella's work.
Maribella's work lets you just refill your hand, so
which
why
is
not?
Pretty good, honestly. Because you can also refill your hand and search out more March of the Machine Lord.
Double March of the Machine Lord is a problem.
Yeah, that basically spells game for most situations.
Unless they have a lot of blockers, but still,
Right.
The Insane Self-Aware Machine, which is one of the major attackers that they have, is a 12/12 with Pierce, so blocking doesn't even help.
Exactly. So be very careful facing that off. Pros and cons of Machina is the fact that the first pro we're going to talk about is the fact that Machina's ability allows you, again, to turn any will you have into hand advantage. And in this game, hand advantage is very important when you're going into the late game or mid game.
It's also one of the fastest ways to search out cards in your deck. Reflect, let's say, unless you have a lot of orbs, it takes like almost 4 turns to get a search off for your judgment. Machina doesn't need to judgment, and you can just search out if you leave will open.
And you will always be leaving will open because of your many dorks.
Yep.
Again, March of the Machine Lord, as we mentioned before, it's a searchable card off of the Dark Machina and is just a game winner on its own. It's an aura effect, so it applies to every single Resonator with no attribute that you control.
No matter when you control them.
Exactly.
For the whole turn.
For the remainder of the turn.
Yep.
And then Machina, again, as we mentioned before, has that banish ability where he can prevent all damage to himself. And when you do that, you banish one of the floaters. The floater floats out the next card from your deck, and that one comes right back in with swiftness and +3/+3.
Yep, so let's say you do Tick-Tock Automaton, that's a 7 attack, swing in, banish it off, you get Robox, that's another 5 damage. Then you banish that off and get Mechanical Sprite, that's another 6 damage. So you turned your 7 damage into 18?
Yeah, 18 damage.
18 damage.
Pretty good.
Off of a 1/3 mana card.
Going into the cons here, the deck is very one-dimensional. Most of the time, your main focus is just to build up resource, build up as much power as you can, and then just burst your opponent down in one turn.
Basically, you can't feign that you're being a different deck, because as soon as they see Machina, they're going to be like, alright, my game plan is kill the dorks, kill the small Resonators, and then just keep the board nice and controlled.
Yep, try not to die.
Yep.
Barrier of Shadows, again, the same principle that comes up with Shion. The later your judgment is, the harder it's going to be for you to come back on board.
And your kill turn takes a turn longer, and also if it takes more mana, it's going to take more time for you to figure out what you're doing with that.
Exactly. Board clears are a big threat to this deck, especially with Flame Trap's recent popularity.
There's also Beat of the Phoenix Wing.
Beat of Phoenix Wing is also a big one that was seen in a lot of the stealth decks over in ARG Philly. And then the last thing is that you've got a tough matchup against some of the bigger decks of this format. Kind of spoilers for what's coming up next, but I'm sure most of you know what's happening here if you've been paying any attention to the latest AGPs and ARGs.
Yep, it has a hard matchup against Necro Lance and Stealth. Stealth is able to does it on the same turn as them, so on the draw they're a turn behind them, and on the play they are doing it with them, and that's not very good.
Yep. And then with Necro Lance, once Lancelot starts triggering, you just beat down all the little Resonators.
Yeah, basically, Necro Lance can kill the mana dorks on turn 2, which means you get basically 1-for-1 mana for them, which isn't that great.
Yeah, so all in all, Machina is one of the most consistent burst OTKs that we have so far, but again suffers from a lot of issues with its just linearity and predictability.
The problem is it's not like a Yu-Gi-Oh! OTK, and I don't really like bringing up Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it's a game we played. In Yu-Gi-Oh! You have true OTKs where it's like you start with nothing and you go into a combo which ends up with enough damage to clear the board. Machina can't do that. He needs some type of board before the turn starts, or like a ton of mana, which just isn't feasible. So
exactly.
He needs a pre-established board in order to get the turn 4 OTK off, which isn't easy against Stealth and Necro Lance.
So there are a lot of weaknesses this deck comes with, but the burst potential that comes out of this deck is incredible. So we have to secure it as that number 3 spot.
Exactly.
Just for the presence it has in a lot of these tournaments.
Yep.
And moving on to number 2, the infamous Necro Lance combo.
Well, there's Lancelot.
Killing somebody just like he does at the AGPs. So, again, this is a super high power, high octane fire deck that gives tons of free buffs through Necromancy's coming out of the grave and Reflect being stupid and giving free +2/+2s. It focuses on beating down your opponent, dealing as much damage as possible, and just straight up killing them before they have a chance to commit anything to the board.
It's a scary deck. Every turn you're playing something big and fast. Everything has swiftness except for like Bloodfire Dragon if you're playing that. And other cards in the deck are just so high value, like Ruck Egg and Guinevere.
Yep.
Everything's just so efficient in the deck, and it's just it just wants to get damage in and make you feel uncomfortable trying to get your plays off without the fear of dying.
Exactly. Like, sometimes it's not the actual deck itself that kills the opponent, but it's the fact that the opponent tries to play a lot of different ways to play around the potential dying.
Yeah, and this deck actually does have a surprising amount of burst potential. Like, I believe the other day I did like 4 mana, deal like 38 damage, which is insane. So let's move into the pros and cons of this deck, because
there's not really much to be said at this point.
It's just a fast deck.
So the pros and cons of this deck: the damage output is incredible. Like, there's tons of early game removal. There's tons of free effects that come off of it. Like, you're just doing a ton of stuff for almost no resource whatsoever.
When it's talking about every buff effect being free here, once the whole entire like game plan of this deck is to dump Necromancy of the Undead Lore into the grave, which says when a Resonator is played on from a non-field zone, attach it to it and give it +2/+2. So
and it becomes a zombie,
which that doesn't matter.
That's irrelevant.
But that buff effect basically pushes Lancelot towards his 1,000 attack requirement to deal 700, and it just deals more damage with every single Resonator you play. And it's a discard that you're looking for, so you get more effective draws out of Gwyn.
Another quick pro about this deck is that you don't have to rely on Rulers of Moria for this deck to be really good. Most people play about 4 to 6 Regalia in this deck.
Yeah, the major one is Levitine. Levitine's like really strong in this deck.
Yep. But the thing is that you don't have to rely on those because your stone lineup is normally just going to be a lot of fire dual stones. Now that the dual stones are out.
And next we got saying that's very strong in time. Most of the other decks on this list are actually very weak in time. They actually need to resort to outside sources in order to deal with time. This deck likes to main multiple copies of Blood Boil, which is one of the best time cards out there. It says deal 700, your opponent can't
600.
heal. 600 and your opponent can't heal.
Making your opponent unable to heal, especially if you chase it to their last drop.
Last drop is an important card for other decks in time because they have no way to actually deal quick damage or heal themselves.
Especially in later rounds when it comes to first damage or first heal is victory.
Yeah, sudden death.
Yeah, people try to do a quick heal with last drop, chain the Blood Boil to the last drop. Spells game.
And the Blood Boil just deals that much more damage, pretty much.
Yep. Some of the cons we have here are just the fact that you can run out of steam really quickly with this deck. Like, you burn through your resources super fast.
But the thing is, you're also playing Reflect, so you can refill those resources, and every single 2-drop or higher Resonator that you play is a threat, which is ridiculous when you think about it.
Exactly. You're weak to some grave removal. I listed Dark Alice on here. Dark Alice isn't super relevant anymore due to Black Moonbeam's prevalence, but people still play it in the rogue matchups. You're still somewhat likely to find them in lower circles.
And also, I've seen people side her. It's definitely not something unheard of.
Exactly. And other cards such as Horn of Sacred Beasts that just shuffle your Necromancy back into the deck can cause a little bit of tempo loss, but they're not hard counters to the deck, but they make your matchup a little tougher.
They're checks.
They're checks, exactly. For a counter, we got Down the Drain.
Alright, so in Game 2 and 3, there's a lot of side options against Necro Lance because people know that it's a strong deck, and it's been a strong deck for a while. So when Battle for Ataractica came out and we got Down the Drain, people just immediately threw into the side deck, and it's been sticking there ever since. Down the Drain removes a lot of tempo. Another card, Prison the Lunar Lake is really good against the deck because Necro Lance has to trigger whenever he attacks. Lancelot has to trigger.
Necro Lance. That's his name now. So, again, we listed that down there.
Yep.
Lancelot has to trigger the damage ability even if you don't have 1,000 attack. You still have to show who you're going to be putting the trigger on. when you attack.
Yeah,
so.
because you could chase the ability and can't just redeclare who you're targeting. You have to target it first.
Exactly. And he also must attack first. So he creates a little bit of linearity if he's with a lot of other cards. So
he creates predictable battle phases, you can say.
Yeah, but still, it's a lot of damage output. So sometimes people don't really care about the predictability. They just want to live.
Mm-hmm.
So Necro Lance has secured itself as one of the most insane decks ever. It's the deck that I actually topped ARG New Jersey with way back in February, back when the deck had Cthulhu.
All that good stuff.
The deck feels so much... It feels more like a tempo deck now, but it still offers a lot of damage output. So
yep. It almost made our number one spot. We had a little bit of a discussion on this before we started the video, but we decided to keep it in slot 2.
Yep, but it is well deserved in slot 2, and it puts up a very difficult matchup for our number 1 slot, which is Stealth Reflect.
Covert Operative.
This isn't actually used in the deck, but it was the only card that had really nice artwork.
Well, if we just pick something that looked nice and has stealth, so
yeah, it has stealth. It's stealth support. Woo! So Stealth Reflect is just incredible. I have very few words. I've actually been playing this deck for the past 2 tournaments I was in, and I have to say that this deck offers so much value.
This deck's just kind of ridiculous. It just says on turn 4, if you didn't kill me or put me in a position where I can't come back, I'm going to come back and you're going to lose.
Yep. Turn 4, setting double Riza, passing to your opponent, and then your opponent makes their play. You flip over the double Riza because you just chase each other. Pay half your life, and then drop 2 Melders out of the deck, who then can come in directly because you have 2,000 or less life.
And then you deal -16 to
2 targets,
2 Resonators that your opponent controls.
And then you have 3,600 worth of bodies on board.
Yep, and 38 with the Reflect buff if you want to go with that. So any little bit of chip damage that you got in the early game is a kill.
Yep. The moment you take more than 200 or 400 damage in the early game from, say, like a Hera, you're dead.
You could die.
You could easily die. And to help with that consistency and help them survive to turn 4, the Stealth Reflect deck also plays cards like Scorn of Dark Alice and Lapis's Dark Storm to knock out your hand.
Yeah, it controls the opponent's resources, trying to make them not go as fast as they could possibly.
It also runs a lot of really nice spot removal, such as in the main deck, it runs Space-Time Anomalies, it runs... why am I blanking on this name right now? Oh, Separation of Body and Soul, if you need to play the control game.
Mm-hmm.
And in the side deck, you put in Down the Drains and Unseen Pressure, just to make it even worse for them.
They also play a lot of counters, like Prison in the Lunar Lake.
Seal of Wind and Light's been teched into the deck. Even though it's a dark deck, you still get the value cards out of that.
Because of Ruler's Memoria and Dual Stones.
Yep. And, again, your life manipulation is there. You have payment options. You also have life gain options in the form of...
Last Drop.
Last Drop, yeah. Because the deck plays a couple of green stones and the 4 rules Moria. And as we said before, these things are instant speed resonators once they're in the chance standby area.
Yeah, basically they have quick cast for 2 mana, and you're getting like 4 drops and 5 drops for 2 mana. It's ridiculous.
It's pretty sick. So going to the pros and cons of this deck. The first pro, as we've mentioned before, in total on turn 5, with your perfect opening, you're getting about 36 to 3,800 damage and a collective -32 to your opponent's resonators on turn 5.
Ow.
That's all we can really say about that. The damage output and control factor of this deck are insane.
And then the turn-per-turn progression of the deck. You scorn first, you get to see what they plan to do with their mulligan, basically, and then on their next turn you get to Lapis's Darkstorm, which is Delinquent Dueling their hand, basically having it. You rip 1 card out, they're at 5 cards, and you rip 2 out, so they're at 3 cards, and they played something, so they're at like 2 cards. It's not fair.
It's very unfair, and it makes your opponent really... It scares your opponent to no end. The fact that Reflect lets you just toss back in your dead stealth cards... dead, because they're zombies. It raises the consistency of the deck extremely highly, and it makes stealth cards as good as they are. And the deck plays cancels. A lot of really, really good cancels.
And efficient cancels, some of which are searchable. Like Prison and Lunar Break.
The cons are kind of few because the deck is just so incredibly important. Your life total decreases rapidly. We said you have to pay half your life. If you're facing off against a red deck, you are dying fast.
Yep, it has a little bit of a rough matchup against Necro Lance.
I found that out today when I played 3 of them in a row.
You didn't lose to most of them, so that's good for you.
Yeah, but it was rough.
Yeah, you got to keep your life in check, and you can't use your Reezas as effectively as you should.
So you have to hard mulligan for your Melders and let your opponent naturally bring you down to 2k.
Yep, and hopefully bring you down to 2k, not just blow right past it.
Absolutely murder you. Yep, there were a couple of times where I got murdered from that.
Next is stealth cards can be canceled when they enter the chase. So if you tap yourself out on 4 to just set 2 cards, and you go to play, all of a sudden you could start playing them on your turn and get Wall of Winded and stuff because you didn't have any mana left over.
Exactly. So, again, it's a similar principle to Huanglong in the fact that your big push turn can be canceled, but it's a little less. It hurts a little less with this deck just because
your big play comes in 2 steps as opposed to 1 giant step.
Exactly.
The whole giant step can't be canceled. You would have to cancel twice in a row.
Another con that's sort of less of a con for the deck and a con for trying to pick up this deck. The deck has a very high skill cap. Like, it takes a lot of micromanagement to really get this deck to work properly, which I didn't know when I was going to my first tournament. There was a lot of things I could have done differently, a lot of really minute details on the stealth cards that you really need to get in check.
Basically, he's saying that the deck won't carry you unless you really know what you're doing.
Like, the deck rewards you for knowing how to play in those turns, and it rewards you for having your game plan set up when you know your matchup. It rewards you for knowing your matchup really well, too.
Exactly.
Especially with Scorns giving you knowledge of everything.
Mm-hmm. And the last one's a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, this deck makes a lot of people kind of hate you.
Because once it kind of happens, you're kind of just like, I knew it was going to happen. I couldn't do anything about it. Great job, Force of Will. You did it.
Yeah, you can find some bitter opponents with this deck. But in all, the deck's really, really strong, and it does a lot.
Yep. Another thing about this deck is the mirror is a little boring.
The mirror is very boring. I won't lie. The mirror, both of you are trying to amass resources. You're not putting things on the board. Whoever puts their Melder or Riza on the board first is normally the one who loses because you just Melder the Riza they brought on the board.
And then kill them for doing it.
So you really have to play with your opponent's mind when you're doing the mirror match. A lot of people side Fairy of Sacred Vision for the mirror match. Some of the main Fairy of Sacred Vision for the mirror match, just because they want to cancel and force out the Melders.
And they're expecting the deck because it's so strong right now.
Exactly. So, I guess another con is that you can expect this deck to be there.
Yep. Unfortunately, the side options for this deck are a little few and far between. You got to look out for, I guess, Blessed Holy Wolf / Fairy of Sacred Vision to try and get the Barrier of Shadows / hit up some stealth cards that get played improperly.
Right. So again, you have to make sure you know exactly what you're doing with this deck.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do play the deck the way it's intended, and if you do play it to its fullest extent, it will reward you highly for making those plays.
Exactly.
So that's it for that. That secures Stealth as our number 1 slot. All other contenders are incredible.
Yep, every deck is strong, has the potential to top. Once you get to around like 4 or 5, it gets a little bit more difficult, but it's still doable for sure.
Right, so here we've got
all the rulers. There's only 3 of them out of the 5 decks.
Yep, Reflect is seen in 3 of those slots. It is the best ruler, but Shion and Machina have their niche roles that really set them apart.
Yep, especially Hypno's Warrior for Shion and the Searching for Machina. They have their own consistency niches. It's just a shame that we don't see more rulers, but we'll maybe see a little bit of a difference in Lapis Cluster.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that. So, again, this has been our top 5 cards of this format. Top 5
decks.
Top 5 decks of this format. Top 5 rulers of this format. Reflect. So this has been Mike.
And Joe.
From Deepwood Force of Will.
Hit that like, subscribe.